Rainbow Magic, Honey the Sweet Fairy. Chapter 1. A Trip to the Sweet Shop. It was a lovely sunny day, and Mr. and Mrs. Tate had sat to lunch outside in the garden as Kirsty and her best friend Rachel Walker sat down to it. Mrs. Tate suddenly groaned aloud. I knew there was something else I meant to get from the shop this morning, she cried. Grant's toffees. I promised I'd take her some this evening, and I completely forgot to buy them. Kirsty put down her sandwich. Don't worry, Mom. We will go to Mrs. Twist's sweet shop after lunch for you, she just suggested. She glanced at Rachel. What do you think? Sure, Rachel said. I've always got time to go to the sweet shop. The two girls smiled at each other. Rachel was staying with the Tates for a whole week. She and Kirsty had met one summer holiday, and they had been good friends ever since. Somehow, whenever the pair of them got together, they always seemed to have the most wonderful adventures, fairy adventures. That reminds me, Mr. Tate said. I saw in the Roker newspaper that Mrs. Twist is retiring. Her daughter taking over the sweet shop from tomorrow. As this is her last day, Mrs. Twist is throwing a party for all her customers. He winked at Kirsty and Rachel. I read something about there being plenty of free sweets up for grabs too. Kirsty nudged Rachel at once. Sweets and a party? She repeated. How exciting! We love parties. Rachel agreed with a grin. The two friends shared the secret. They had been busy all week helping the party fairies of Fairyland. The fairies were preparing a surprise celebration for the Fairy King and Queen's 1000th Jubilee. But wicked Jack Frost had plans for his own rival party. All week he'd been sending his goblin into the human world to disrupt people's parties. Then, whenever a party fairy zoomed in to save the day, a goblin would try to snatch her magical party bag and take it to Jack Frost. Kirsty and Rachel had been helping the party fairies out with the goblins, but they knew their work wasn't over yet, not if Jack Frost had anything to do with it. After lunch, Mrs. Tate gave the girls some money for the toffees, and they set out for the sweet shop. As they turned into the high street, they saw that a few children were already clustered outside Mrs. Twist's shop. But as they drew nearer, Kirsty and Rachel realized that something was wrong. A boy was pulling a face as he licked a lollipop, and one little girl started to cry. This sweet tastes funny, she wailed. Kirsty and Rachel went into the shop, wondering what was going on. The tiny shop looked very festive. Colorful balloons hung from the ceiling, and pretty streamers were twined around big jars of sweets that lined the shelves. Mrs. Tate stood behind the counter as usual, but Kirsty noticed at once that she didn't look her normal, cheerful self. Hello, Mrs. Twist, Kirsty called. Is everything all right? Mrs. Twist shook her head sadly. Not really, she replied. It's my last day, and I was hoping to have a wonderful party, but all my sweets are spoiled.